simple nurse was forced to breastfeed the divorced, wealthy CEO's baby, and he fell in love with her. Danica Moore had been staring at the ceiling of her cramped Dallas apartment for 3 hours, trying to forget the empty crib in the corner. 3 months since she lost her own baby. 3 months of her body still producing milk for a child who would never cry for her again. Have you ever been forced to do something? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She answered the phone at 11:47 p.m. thinking it was just another shift, until they told her whose baby needed feeding and her milk-heavy breast suddenly felt like a curse. Danica Moore had been staring at the ceiling of her cramped Dallas apartment for 3 hours, trying to forget the empty crib in the corner. 3 months since she lost her own baby. 3 months of her body still producing milk for a child who would never cry for her again. The phone buzzed against the nightstand. Danica? This is Patricia from Mercy General. We need you here now. She sat up, heart racing. Emergency calls meant good money, and her bank account was screaming for attention. What's the situation? Neonatal unit. Private wing. We have a delicate case. The pause made her stomach twist. Patricia never hesitated. The woman could deliver bad news like she was reading a grocery list. Delicate how? The infant belongs to Owen Strathmore. Danica's blood went cold. Even she knew that name. Tech billionaire. Ruthless divorce warrior who'd sued his ex-wife for full custody 2 weeks after she gave birth. The kind of man who treated people like chess pieces. The baby's rejecting formula. Patricia continued. Severe colic. He's been screaming for 6 hours straight. So call a specialist. Call 10 specialists. The man can afford it. We did. Nothing's working. Another pause. Danica, you're the only lactating staff member we have available. The words hit her like cold water. You're asking me to. Just once. One feeding. Quietly. No one would know. Her body betrayed her. Milk already letting down at the thought of a hungry infant. The cruel joke of biology. Her breasts still believed they had a purpose. Have you ever been asked to cross a line you thought was sacred? To give the most intimate part of yourself to save someone else's child? That's exactly what they wanted from Danica. Her grief. Her milk. Her body doing what it was made for, just not for who it was meant for. How much? She whispered. Triple overtime. Plus discussion bonus. The money would cover her rent for 2 months. Maybe 3 if she was careful. 20 minutes later, she stood outside room 237 in the exclusive wing of Mercy General. The hallway smelled like money, expensive disinfectant, and quiet desperation. Through the glass, she could see him. A tiny fist waving in fury, face red with rage that no amount of wealth could soothe. The neonatal unit hummed with expensive machinery, all chrome and whispered efficiency, where even the air felt filtered of struggle. But the crying from room 237 cut through the clinical calm like a blade. She pushed open the door, and the baby's wails hit her like a physical force. Her body responded instantly, milk flowing, arms aching to hold him. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about a baby who needed what only she could give. What would you sacrifice for someone you love? How far would you go before crossing your own boundaries? Tell me in the comments below. As she lifted the screaming infant to her chest, the door opened. Owen Strathmore stood frozen in the doorway, his cold blue eyes watching the most private moment a woman could share, and she realized her life had just changed forever. He came to check on his investment and found something priceless. A woman loving his child the way he'd forgotten was possible. Owen Strathmore had built an empire by controlling every variable, predicting every outcome. But nothing had prepared him for the sight of Danica Moore in that rocking chair, his son peaceful against her chest for the first time in days. She sat like a Renaissance painting come to life, dark skin glowing under the soft nursery lamp, his pale son nestled against her as if he'd found exactly where he belonged. The crying had stopped. The room felt different. Sacred, almost. I should apologize for walking in, he said, voice rougher than intended. You should, she replied, not looking up, but we both know you won't. Smart. Most people stumbled over themselves when they met him, but she cut straight to the truth. His son made a soft sound of contentment. Tiny fingers curled against her skin. How long has he been like this? Quiet? About 10 minutes. She finally looked up, and he felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes held pain he recognized, the kind that came from loving someone you couldn't save. He was hungry, really hungry. Owen stepped closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Marcus looked different in her arms. Not just calm, but content, like he'd been waiting his whole short life for this exact moment. The formula isn't what he needs. Her voice was gentle but firm. Some babies can tell the difference between what's made in a lab and what's made by love. The words hit him sideways. When was the last time someone had spoken about love in connection to his son? His ex-wife had treated Marcus like a burden from day one. The nanny saw him as a paycheck. Even Owen himself had been focused on custody battles and legal strategies instead of simply loving. Have you ever walked in on a moment so beautiful it stopped your heart? Share that memory in the comments. What's your name? He asked quietly. Danica. Danica. He repeated it like he was memorizing something important. I'll remember that. She shifted slightly, and he caught a glimpse of the vulnerability she was trying to hide. This wasn't easy for her. Hell, it probably hurt, holding someone else's child when her own arms were empty. Why are you really here? She asked. It's past midnight. Most fathers would trust the hospital staff. Most fathers don't have lawyers breathing down their necks about custody. The honesty surprised him. He didn't usually explain himself to employees. My ex-wife's team is looking for any excuse to claim I'm an unfit parent. Are you? The question should have offended him. Instead, it made him think. When was the last time he'd held Marcus like this? When had he last been in this room without checking his phone or thinking about business? I'm trying not to be. Something softened in her expression. Marcus made another contented sound, and she smiled. The kind of smile that transformed her entire face. He's beautiful, she said, strong. He just needed someone to listen to what he was trying to say. Before leaving, he turned back. The image of them together was burned into his memory, something he'd never experienced but suddenly craved. A real moment of peace in his carefully controlled world. Danica, he said again, like a prayer. I'll remember that. She didn't know yet that he'd already decided to make sure she never forgot his. She thought it was coincidence when they kept scheduling her for his son's shifts, until she realized rich men don't believe in coincidence. 3 nights later, Danica's phone rang again. Room 237. Same situation. Patricia's voice held something different this time. Less urgency, more arrangement. The baby's still rejecting formula? Mr. Strathmore specifically requested you. The words made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with money. Requested me? For Marcus's care. He was very specific about your qualifications. Danica stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of 3 sleepless nights thinking about that moment in the nursery. The way Owen had looked at her. The way his son had felt so right in her arms. I'll be there in 20. The NICU became their secret world after midnight. Hushed conversations over an innocent child who had no idea he was becoming the bridge between 2 wounded hearts. He's been fussy all evening, the day nurse reported, clearly eager to hand over the difficult case. Nothing we've tried works. But the moment Danica lifted Marcus, he settled. Like magic. Like he'd been waiting for her specifically. Smart boy, she murmured against his soft hair. You know what you want. He gets that from me. Owen's voice made her look up. He stood in the doorway again, but this time he didn't look surprised. He looked pleased. Mr. Strathmore. Working late again? Something like that. He stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt smaller, more intimate. How is he? Happy now? She settled into the rocking chair, and Marcus immediately began rooting against her chest. Her body responded before her mind could protest. Milk letting down, maternal instincts overriding professional boundaries. Owen watched with an intensity that made her skin warm despite the clinical chill of the room. When someone starts doing little things that make your life easier, is it kindness or manipulation? Have you experienced this? Share below. I brought something, he said, producing a sleek box from behind his back. For the hospital. For situations like this. She opened it to find the most expensive breast pump she'd ever seen. Hospital grade, top of the line, probably worth more than her car. This is practical. But the way he said it, the way his eyes lingered on her, suggested nothing about this was purely practical. Over the next hour, they fell into an easy rhythm. She fed Marcus while Owen handled the technical details, adjusting the room temperature, dimming the lights, even playing soft music from his phone, like they were partners in this midnight caregiving dance. "You're good at this," she observed as he expertly burped Marcus. YouTube, university. He looked almost embarrassed. Turns out there's a lot I didn't know about taking care of babies. Most new fathers feel that way. Most new fathers don't have their every move scrutinized by hostile lawyers. The bitterness in his voice made her study his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes she hadn't noticed before. Stress, maybe, or exhaustion. The night Marcus smiled for the first time, at her, not his father, Owen's expression shifted from tender to territorial. "He needs you," Owen said quietly. But the hunger in his eyes suggested someone else did too. The night she fed him in Owen's penthouse, surrounded by million-dollar views, she realized some boundaries can't be uncrossed. The hospital called in a substitute. Owen's voice was careful, controlled. "Marcus has been screaming for 2 hours." Danica pressed the phone closer to her ear, already reaching for her keys. It was past midnight, and she'd been having the same dream again, holding her own baby, only to wake up with empty arms. "I'll be right there. Actually," he paused. "I brought him home. Would you consider coming here?" Her hand froze on the doorknob. Going to the hospital was professional. Going to his home was something else entirely. "Mr. Strathmore. Owen, please. He's inconsolable, and the nanny quit this afternoon. I think he needs you." The word hung unspoken between them. 30 minutes later, she stood in front of a downtown high-rise that probably cost more than most small towns. The penthouse elevator required a key card that Owen had sent down with building security. His penthouse stretched endlessly toward floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Dallas skyline. All glass and steel and money, until she sat in the nursery rocker and made it warm. Marcus was red-faced and furious, tiny fists waving like he was fighting invisible enemies. But the moment she lifted him, he melted against her chest with a sob of relief that broke her heart. "How did you know?" Owen asked, settling into the chair across from her. "That he'd respond to you? I didn't. Sometimes babies just connect with certain people." She smoothed Marcus's downy hair. "Maybe he can sense that I understand what it's like to need someone." The honesty slipped out before she could stop it. Owen's expression shifted, becoming more intense. "What did you lose?" The question was quiet, but it hit her like a physical blow. Most people didn't ask directly. They danced around her grief with awkward condolences and uncomfortable silences. "A daughter. 3 months ago." Her voice was steady, but her hand shook slightly. "Stillborn. 28 weeks. I am sorry. Are you?" She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Or are you relieved that your son's caregiver understands loss?" Instead of being offended, he leaned forward. "Both. Is that terrible?" The honesty surprised her. Most wealthy men she'd encountered, which wasn't many, spoke in careful PR language. Owen was direct in a way that felt dangerous. "Why me?" she asked. "You could hire the best nanny in the country. Hell, you could hire 10 nannies. Because you're the only person who's ever looked at my son like he was worth loving, not just inheriting." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Marcus made a contented sound and began to drift off against her chest. "We should set up the pump," she said softly, trying to restore some professional distance. "I'll get it." But when Owen returned, he didn't just hand her the equipment. He knelt beside the rocking chair, his hands covering hers as he showed her the proper angle, the right pressure. His fingers were warm, calloused in unexpected places, and when he looked up to check her understanding, their faces were inches apart. "What's the most expensive place you've ever felt completely out of your element? How did you handle it?" "Is this okay?" he asked, voice low. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Everything about this was wrong. The intimacy, the setting, the way her body was responding to his proximity. But Marcus chose that moment to sigh in perfect contentment, and suddenly nothing else mattered except this moment of peace she was giving to an innocent child. Thunder crashed outside, rain pelting the massive windows. "Stay," Owen said simply. "The roads are dangerous." But they both knew the real danger was the way he looked at her when he said it, like she was already home. She stayed for the weather, but woke up to something more dangerous, the feeling that she belonged in his world. Danica woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of baby laughter. For one disoriented moment, she forgot where she was. The guest room was bigger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and cream that probably cost more than she made in a month. But it was the contentment in her chest that really threw her off balance. When was the last time she'd slept 8 hours straight? She found them in the kitchen, Owen attempting to feed Marcus from a bottle while the baby grabbed at everything within reach. Both of them were covered in what looked like mashed banana. "He's got opinions about breakfast," Owen said, looking up with a smile that transformed his entire face. Morning light streamed through crystal-clean windows as she made coffee in his designer kitchen, Marcus gurgling in his bouncer nearby. The picture of everything she'd lost and everything she was afraid to want again. "Let me." She took the spoon from Owen's hand, their fingers brushing in the handoff. The contact sent electricity up her arm, and from the way his breath caught, he felt it too. Marcus immediately opened his mouth for her like a baby bird, making happy sounds between bites. "He likes you better," Owen observed. "He trusts me. There's a difference." "Is there?" The question made her look up from feeding Marcus. Owen was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Hungry, but not for food. "You don't know me," she said carefully. "Not really. I know you drive yourself to work double shifts because your car makes that clicking sound that means you need new brake pads but can't afford them. I know you volunteer at the community clinic on your days off. I know you give Marcus a level of attention that most people reserve for their own children." The detailed knowledge of her life should have been creepy. Instead, it felt like being seen. "How do you? I notice things about people who matter. Have you ever found yourself living a life that felt like someone else's dream? Tell me about a moment when you felt like you didn't belong but wanted to stay anyway." "Mr. Strathmore." "Owen." He stepped closer. "My name is Owen, and I'd like to hear you say it." "Owen." The name felt different on her tongue. More personal. More dangerous. He reached out, thumb brushing a spot of banana from her cheek. The touch was gentle, but it sent heat racing through her entire body. "I should go," she whispered. "Should you?" Instead of stepping back, she found herself leaning into his touch. Why had someone last touched her like this? Like she was precious instead of useful? "I lost my daughter," she said suddenly. "Isabella. I held her for 2 hours before I had to let go." Owen's other hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't realize had fallen. "My ex-wife looked at Marcus like he was a mistake," he said quietly. "Even when she was pregnant, she acted like he was ruining her body, her life. I thought that was normal. I thought all new mothers felt trapped. They don't. I know that now. Because of you." The kiss happened slowly, like a question being asked and answered. His lips were soft, warm, tasting faintly of coffee and something uniquely him. When she kissed him back, he made a sound deep in his throat that vibrated through her entire body. Her phone buzzed against the counter, breaking the spell. She pulled back, both of them breathing hard. The text was from her supervisor. "We need to talk." Immediately, as Owen read over her shoulder, his jaw tightened. "What did you do?" she whispered. But his silence told her everything. The storm outside had been nothing compared to what was coming. She answered the phone at 6:47 a.m., thinking it was another shift request. Instead, her supervisor's voice cut through the morning quiet like broken glass. "Danica, we need you in my office. Now." The hospital conference room smelled like burnt coffee and judgment. 3 administrators sat across from her, all white, all wearing the kind of concerned expressions that meant trouble. The photos spread across the table told a story she recognized but couldn't defend. There she was, walking into Owen Strathmore's building at midnight, leaving at dawn, her scrubs wrinkled, hair loose around her shoulders like she'd just rolled out of someone's bed. "These appeared on social media this morning," Dr. Richards said, not meeting her eyes, "along with some very specific allegations about your relationship with Mr. Strathmore. Have you ever been accused of something that was technically true but completely wrong? When the facts lined up perfectly but missed the heart of what really happened." Danica stared at the images. In the photos, she looked exactly like what they thought she was, a desperate woman using her body to climb out of poverty. The truth was so much more complicated than gold digging. But how do you explain that to people who've already decided what they're seeing? "I feed his baby," she said quietly. "That's all. At his penthouse. Multiple nights a week." Dr. Richards pushed another photo forward. "Our ethics board is very concerned about the appearance of impropriety." The room felt like it was shrinking. 20 years of perfect nursing records, countless nights caring for other people's children, and now they were reducing her to some kind of predator. "You think I'm seducing him?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "My milk kept his son alive when formula wasn't working. That's not inappropriate. That's what you asked me to do." But she could see in their faces. They'd already written her story. Black nurse from the wrong side of Dallas meets white billionaire with more money than sense. They knew how this ended, with her license suspended and Owen moving on to his next charity case. What they didn't know was how her skin burned when he looked at her. How his rare smiles made her forget she wasn't supposed to want him. How she lay awake thinking about his hands covering hers during those quiet midnight feedings. "We're opening a formal investigation," Dr. Richards continued. "Until then, you're suspended from any cases involving the Strathmore family. Tell me, what would you do if your biggest mistake was falling for someone you were supposed to help? When caring too much became evidence against your character?" Danica stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I've never done anything wrong except care about that baby like he was my own." "That's exactly the problem," Dr. Richards said. The parking garage was empty except for Owen's black Tesla. He leaned against it like he'd been waiting, which he probably had. Rich men always knew things before they happened. "Let me fix this," he said before she could speak. "You already have." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "You've made me exactly what they said I was. A black woman who forgot her place." The pain in his eyes almost made her believe he hadn't planned this. Almost. As she walked away, she heard him call her name. But some distances can't be crossed with words, and she'd already traveled too far from the woman who used to believe in fairy tales. She found him in his office 3 days later, standing behind his desk like a king in his castle. The city stretched out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows, all power and privilege, and the kind of view that reminded people like her where they belonged. But when she burst through those mahogany doors, he looked smaller than she'd ever seen him. "You orchestrated this." It wasn't a question. The pieces had fallen together during 3 sleepless nights of replaying every conversation, every convenient coincidence. The schedule changes, the photos, all of it. Owen's silence was answer enough. "What?" The word came out broken, and she hated herself for still caring about his reasons. He moved around the desk slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "My ex-wife's lawyers were building a case. Said I was an unfit father because Marcus bonded with hired help instead of family. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was playing chess while you thought you were just living your life? So you made me the hired help who got too attached." Danica laughed, but sounded more like crying. "Brilliant. Create a scandal so big that any custody judge would have to address it. I needed Marcus to have legal protection, someone who would fight for him if something happened to me." Owen stopped just out of reach. "I needed you in his life permanently. You used me." "Yes." The honesty hit harder than a lie would have. "At least lies could be forgiven. You destroyed my reputation to win a custody case." She could barely get the words out. "Made me look like some desperate woman throwing herself at a rich man. I was going to explain everything after the hearing. Clear your name, make sure you kept your job, give you anything you wanted. Except the truth." Owen's jaw tightened. "The truth was that I was falling for you. and that wasn't part of the plan. The truth was that I started manipulating the situation, but couldn't manipulate how I felt about you. The space between them felt electric and dangerous. All the nights, she'd wondered if he felt it too, if those long looks meant something more than gratitude. Now she knew, and wished she didn't. "How do I know what's real?" she whispered. "Because real doesn't come with a plan." He took another step closer. "Real is messy and terrifying and completely out of my control. Real is waking up thinking about you and go to sleep wishing you were there. Real is watching you with my son and knowing I want that for the rest of my life." The kiss happened before either of them decided it should. Angry and desperate and full of 3 months of tension that had nowhere else to go. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, and she forgot why she was supposed to hate him, until she remembered. She pushed him away, chest heaving. "You think that makes it better?" "It makes it hell," he said roughly. "Because now I have to live with knowing I hurt the only woman I've ever loved to save my son." What would you do if someone broke your heart to protect their child? Is it possible to love someone who manipulated you, even if their intentions came from love? Danica backed toward the door, tears finally spilling over. "Stay away from me, both of you." As she walked away, leaving him disheveled and desperate, she didn't see the custody papers on his desk, the ones that would make her Marcus's legal mother. But first, he had to convince her to forgive the unforgivable, and they both knew that might be impossible. The courthouse steps felt like climbing toward Judgment Day. Danica's heels clicked against marble as she walked beside Owen's lawyer, trying not to think about the cameras following their every move. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with the kind of energy that meant blood was about to be spilled. Owen sat at one table with his legal team, not looking at her. His ex-wife, Victoria, occupied the other side with enough lawyers to invade a small country. Have you ever walked into a room where everyone was discussing your worthiness to love a child? Where strangers in expensive suits debated whether your heart was big enough or your bank account too small? The court calls Danica Moore to the stand. The walk to the witness box felt endless. Every eye in the room followed her. Some curious, some sympathetic, most just hungry for drama. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, knowing that nobody really wanted to hear it. Victoria's lawyer stood up like a predator scenting blood. "Miss Moore, you've been employed as a nurse for how long?" 15 years. "And in those 15 years, have you ever formed inappropriate attachments to patients' families?" The question hung in the air like poison. "I care about all my patients. But Mr. Strathmore's son was special, wasn't he? Special enough that you began visiting his home regularly." Owen's jaw tightened, but he couldn't help her now. This was her fight. Marcus was colicky. He needed consistent care. At midnight, in Mr. Strathmore's private residence. The lawyer smiled like a shark. "Come now, Miss Moore. What kind of care requires a nurse to spend the night?" The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Danica met Victoria's eyes across the room, cold blue like her ex-husband's, but without any warmth. The kind that saved a baby's life when his own mother abandoned him. The words dropped like stones in still water. Victoria's face went pale, and her lawyer quickly objected, but the damage was done. Objection sustained. The witness will stick to answering the questions asked. But Danica was done playing by rules written by people who never had to choose between pride and survival. "You want to know what kind of care I provided?" She looked directly at the judge, a black woman about her mother's age. "I held that baby when he cried for hours. I walked the floor with him when formula made him sick. I was there at 3 a.m. when fever spiked, and at sunrise when he finally smiled. That's not inappropriate attachment. That's love. Tell me, what makes someone a real parent? The woman who gives birth and walks away, or the one who shows up every day to wipe tears and change diapers and worry about first steps?" The courtroom was completely silent now. "Love isn't about who carried a child for 9 months," Danica continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about who shows up for the next 18 years. Who sees potential instead of problems. Who fights for a future that child deserves." When she finished, the only sound was her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. The judge's words would echo in her dreams. Joint custody granted. with Danica more appointed as primary caregiver, based on the child's clear attachment and best interests. She'd won everything except the one thing that mattered, Owen's honesty. But as she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. "Please," he whispered, "let me explain everything." They met in the one place that still felt safe, Marcus's nursery. The baby slept peacefully in his crib, unaware that the adults who loved him were trying to piece together a future from the fragments of broken trust. Owen sat in the rocking chair, head in his hands. "Ask me anything. No more lies, no more strategy. Just truth." Danica leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed like armor. "When did it stop being about Marcus and start being about me?" "The second night you came here." His voice was barely above a whisper. "You were singing to him some old gospel song, and I realized I'd never heard anything that beautiful. That's when I knew I was in trouble." Have you ever felt your heart breaking and healing at the same time? When someone tells you exactly what you wanted to hear, but 3 months too late. So you decided to manipulate me instead of just asking me out like a normal person? Owen looked up, and she could see exhaustion in every line of his face. Normal men don't have ex-wives threatening to take their children. Normal men don't have legal teams telling them their son needs stable maternal influence or he'll end up in foster care while they fight it out. Foster care? The words hit her like cold water. Victoria's lawyers found a clause. If I couldn't provide adequate child care, temporary custody would go to the state until the case was resolved. His hand was shaking now. I couldn't risk it. I couldn't risk losing him. The room felt different suddenly. All her anger at being manipulated crashed against the reality of a father desperate to save his child. "You could have told me and asked you to lie in court, to risk your license for a man you barely knew." Owen shook his head. "I thought if I could create a situation where your attachment looked natural, inevitable." "You thought wrong. I know that now." He stood up slowly, moving to the window that overlooked the city. "I manipulated the situation, but I couldn't manipulate how I felt about you. Every night you were here, every time you smiled at him or sang him to sleep, I fell harder. That wasn't part of any plan." Danica walked to the crib, looking down at Marcus's sleeping face. "He looks like you when he's peaceful. He looks like hope," Owen said quietly. They stood there in silence, two broken people trying to figure out if love was enough to bridge the gap between trust and betrayal. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Owen continued. "I'm asking you to help me be better, to help us build something real from this mess I created. What would you do if someone admitted they'd lied to protect their child? Is it possible to start over when the foundation was built on deception?" Danica reached into the crib, adjusting Marcus's blanket. "I can't promise anything except that I'll try. For him, and for us. I don't know if there's an us anymore." But when she turned around, she didn't step away from his outstretched hand. Baby steps, she thought. That's how you learn to trust again. The knock at the door came like thunder, urgent and demanding. Expecting someone, Danica asked. Owen's face went white as he looked at his phone. "It's Victoria, with a court order." Everything they just started to rebuild was about to be tested in ways neither of them was ready for. But this time, they wouldn't face it alone. The photographers were waiting when they left the courthouse after Victoria's failed emergency petition. Camera flashes exploded like lightning as they walked to Owen's car. Marcus bundled in Danica's arms like she could shield him from the chaos. "Miss Moore, are you using this baby to trap a billionaire? Owen, is it true you're paying her for sex?" The questions hit like bullets, each one designed to draw blood. Danica kept her head down, but she could feel their hungry eyes cataloging every detail. Her off-the-rack dress, her natural hair, the way she held Marcus protectively against her chest. Have you ever become a headline you never wanted to be? When your private life becomes public entertainment and everyone has an opinion about your choices. The car door slammed behind them, muffling the noise but not the damage. Owen's hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles went white. "I'm sorry," he said for the 100th time that week. "Stop apologizing and start fixing this." Danica's voice was steadier than she felt. "They're not going to leave us alone." The headlines that evening were worse than she'd imagined. Baby mama drama. Nurse wins custody of billionaire's son. From poverty to penthouse. The Danica Moore story. Her nursing school graduation photo ran next to shots of Owen's ex-wife in designer gowns. The contrast deliberate and cruel. But it was the comments that really cut deep. Gold digger got what she wanted. Poor white man doesn't know what hit him. She's using that baby to get a payday. Owen found her reading them on her phone at 2 a.m., tears streaming down her face. Stop! He took the phone gently from her hands. Don't do this to yourself. They think I'm some kind of predator. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. They think I planned this whole thing. They don't know you, but they're never going to stop talking, are they? Every time Marcus goes to school, every time we go to the grocery store, people are going to whisper and point and judge. Owen pulled her close, and she let herself lean into his warmth for the first time since learning the truth about his manipulation. Then we give them something else to talk about, he said into her hair. Like what? Like a love story they can't tear down. The next morning brought a new crisis. Danica's supervisor called to inform her that several wealthy families had specifically requested she not be assigned to their children. The hospital, bowing to pressure, was considering terminating her employment. This is what you wanted, isn't it? She asked Owen that afternoon. They sat in his living room while Marcus played on a blanket between them. Me completely dependent on you? No job, no independence, nowhere else to go. No. His answer was immediate and fierce. I want you to have everything you deserve, starting with choices. He handed her a folder she hadn't noticed him carrying. Inside were business plans, financial projections, and legal documents for a private pediatric nursing practice. Her name was on everything. Your own clinic, your own rules, families who want the best care, not the cheapest. Tell me, what does it mean when someone doesn't just apologize for hurting you, but actively works to rebuild what they broke? Danica stared at the papers, hardly believing what she was seeing. You did this for me. I did this for us. All three of us. Marcus chose that moment to babble something that sounded almost like mama, reaching his chubby hands toward Danica. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled without reservation. Maybe love really could build something stronger than hate. When a world attacks your love, you have two choices: surrender or build something stronger than their hate. The moving trucks had barely left when Owen found Danica standing in their new kitchen, staring out at the high walls that now surrounded their home. Marcus babbled happily in his high chair, completely unaware that those walls weren't just for privacy. They were for protection. Second thoughts? Owen asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Never, she said, leaning back against his chest. I'm just thinking about how different this feels from that first night in the hospital. Their new home sat on 3 acres in Highland Park, far enough from the city chaos, but close enough for Owen's business meetings. Every window had bulletproof glass. Every door had reinforced locks. The nursery had a panic room disguised as a walk-in closet. It shouldn't have felt romantic, but somehow it did. Because for the first time in months, they could breathe without cameras flashing in their faces. They could take Marcus to the backyard without worrying about telephoto lenses capturing his first steps. They could be a family without performing for strangers who thought their love was a scandal worth dissecting. Mama up! Marcus reached his chubby arms toward Danica, and Owen watched her face transform the way it always did when their son called her that. The custody papers might say legal guardian, but Marcus didn't care about legalities. To him, she was simply Mama, the woman who sang to him at night, who knew exactly how to make his bottles, who could stop his tears with just a smile. Have you ever watched someone love your child better than you thought possible? It's humbling and beautiful and terrifying all at once. Owen's phone buzzed with another business call, but he ignored it. His partners had been expressing concerns about his relationship affecting their conservative client base. Translation: they were worried about money more than morality. Take it, Danica said, reading his expression. I know that ringtone. It can wait. No, it can't. Your business matters too. But as he answered the call and heard James Morrison's voice, sharp with barely concealed irritation, Owen realized some things mattered more than profit margins. The Peterson account is reconsidering, James said without preamble. They're concerned about optics, Optics, Owen repeated flatly. Look, we're not saying anything about your personal choices, but when our biggest client starts asking questions about family values. Owen watched Danica tickle Marcus until he squealed with laughter, her scrubs replaced with jeans and a soft sweater that showed off curves he knew by heart now. This was his family. These were his values. Then maybe they're not our kind of client, Owen said. The silence on the other end stretched long enough for Marcus to clap his hands and babble something that sounded suspiciously like Dada. Owen, be reasonable. I'm being reasonable. Reasonably protective of what matters. After he hung up, Danica studied his face. How bad? Nothing we can't handle. But that night, as they lay in their new king-size bed with Marcus sleeping peacefully in the nursery down the hall, Owen felt the weight of what protecting his family might cost. His business built over 15 years. Relationships that went back to college. A reputation that had taken decades to establish. You're thinking too loud, Danica murmured against his chest. Sorry. She lifted her head, dark eyes serious in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom windows. Whatever you're thinking about giving up for us, don't. I'm not giving up anything. I'm choosing what's worth keeping. Her kiss tasted like forever and promises they were still learning how to make. When she moved on top of him, skin warm against skin, Owen realized that some fortresses weren't built with walls and security systems. They were built with trust that had survived deception, with love that refused to apologize for existing, with the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Marcus's soft breathing came through the baby monitor as they moved together in the darkness, creating their own language of touch and whispered promises. This was their sanctuary, their choice. Their family. Let the world keep talking. They had better things to do. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter between them 2 weeks later. 2 lines that would either cement their bond or complicate it beyond repair. What does this mean for us? Danica whispered, her hand trembling slightly as she held the plastic stick. But Owen's smile told her everything she needed to know. He pulled her close, spinning her around their marble bathroom until she laughed despite her tears. It means our family is growing, he said simply. It means Marcus is going to be a big brother. It means, he paused, suddenly serious. It means I get to love you through creating life instead of just surviving it. Outside their fortress walls, cameras still waited. Business partners still worried. The world still had opinions about a black nurse and a white billionaire building something beautiful from something broken. But inside, with Danica's head on his shoulder and their son sleeping down the hall and new life growing between them, Owen had never felt richer. She thought one miracle baby was enough until she realized love doesn't divide, it multiplies. The ultrasound room at Dallas Presbyterian felt different this time. No emergency. No desesperación. Just pure joy as the technician moved the wand across Danica's growing belly while Owen held Marcus on his lap. There's your baby, the technician said, and suddenly their whole world shifted on the grainy black and white screen. Marcus pressed his little hand against the monitor, babbling something that sounded like baby talk mixed with recognition. At 18 months, he might not understand the concept of siblings, but he definitely understood that something important was happening. Baby, he said clearly, and Danica's eyes filled with tears. That's when Owen said it. Right there in the medical office with ultrasound gel, still warm on her skin, and their son clapping his hands at the screen, showing his future sibling. Marry me. Danica turned to stare at him. Because I'm pregnant? Because I can't imagine any future that doesn't include all of us. Because you've given me a family I never knew I wanted. Because Marcus calls you mama and means it. Because this baby growing inside you is proof that love can create miracles. He didn't have a ring, didn't have fancy words prepared, just had truth and a heart that had learned to beat in rhythm with hers. And he added with that crooked smile she'd fallen for, because I want to make sure you can't change your mind about keeping us. Have you ever been proposed to in a medical office with baby heartbeats echoing off the walls? It shouldn't be romantic, but somehow was perfect, because their love had never been conventional. Why should their engagement be? Yes, she whispered, and Marcus clapped like he understood exactly what was happening. The engagement party 3 months later was everything their relationship hadn't been: public, celebrated, normal. Owen's penthouse filled with people who'd become family over the months of controversy. Colleagues from the hospital who'd stood by Danica when others whispered. Business associates who cared more about Owen's happiness than his image. Danica wore a flowing dress that accommodated her growing belly, her engagement ring catching the light as she moved through rooms filled with laughter and music. Marcus toddled between guests, charm inherited from his father, but warmth that was pure Danica. "Look at you," her friend Keisha said, pulling her aside. "Glowing like you swallowed starlight." "I'm happy," Danica said simply. "Really, truly happy." "Good, because that man looks at you like you hung the moon." Across the room, Owen was deep in conversation with Dr. Williams, the NICU director who'd supported Danica through the worst of the scandal. But his eyes kept finding her, soft with the kind of love that had survived every test thrown at it. The party was winding down when the envelope arrived, hand-delivered by courier, with Owen's name written in handwriting neither of them recognized. "Should I open it?" Owen asked, studying the expensive stationery. Together, Danica said, because they'd learned that secrets, even innocent ones, could destroy what they'd built. Inside was a single sheet of legal letterhead. As Owen read, his face went from confusion to anger to something that looked like fear. "What is it?" He handed her the letter, voice tight. "Victoria's back. She wants Marcus." The room seemed to tilt around them. Victoria, the ex-wife who'd walked away from her son when postpartum depression became too much to handle, who'd signed away her parental rights in exchange for a clean divorce, who hadn't called or visited or even sent a birthday card. Now she wanted custody of the child she'd abandoned. "She can't," Danica said, hand instinctively moving to her belly. "The court's already decided. Marcus is ours." But they both knew that money could buy new lawyers, that biological mothers had rights that legal guardians didn't, that their happiness had always existed at the mercy of other people's decisions. At the engagement party, surrounded by friends who'd become family and family who'd become friends, she felt complete for the first time since losing her first baby. But the envelope that arrived during their celebration contained news that would test everything they'd built. The war for their family was just beginning. She thought the hardest part was falling in love with someone who deceived her, until his ex-wife decided to fight for the son she'd abandoned. The courthouse steps were slick with October rain as they climbed toward what felt like a final judgment. Danica's belly was round with their daughter now, 7 months of new life growing while they fought to keep the family they'd already built. Marcus clung to her hand, confused by the serious faces and hushed voices. At 2 years old, he didn't understand custody battles or biological rights. He just knew Mama was scared, and when Mama was scared, his world felt shaky. Victoria sat across the courtroom looking nothing like the broken woman who'd signed away her rights 18 months ago. Designer clothes, professional hair, the kind of put-together appearance that money could buy and depression could steal. She'd been in treatment, her lawyer explained. Residential care for postpartum psychosis. Therapy and medication had restored her mental health. She was ready to be a mother now. The question before this court, Judge Martinez said, is whether the best interests of the child are served by disrupting an established bond or honoring biological connection. Have you ever sat in a courtroom while strangers debated your right to love a child? While lawyers reduced your family to legal arguments and precedents? Victoria's attorney painted Danica as an opportunist who'd seduced a vulnerable father. Never mind that Owen had orchestrated their meeting. Never mind that Marcus had thrived in their care. The narrative was simple. Gold-digging nurse manipulates grief-stricken billionaire. But when it was their turn, Owen's lawyer had a different story to tell. "Your Honor, we'd like to call Marcus Strathmore to the stand." "Objection," Victoria's attorney said immediately. "The child is too young to testify. We're not asking him to testify. We're asking the court to observe." Judge Martinez looked skeptical, but allowed it. The bailiff brought Marcus forward, and suddenly the sterile courtroom held its breath. Marcus looked around at all the serious faces, then spotted Victoria across the room. She was his biological mother, his DNA, the woman who'd carried him for 9 months and given birth to him. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and ran straight to Danica. "Mama," he said, burying his face in her neck. "Home now." You could hear a pin drop in that courtroom. Even Victoria's lawyer looked uncomfortable, but it was what happened next that sealed their fate. Victoria stood up, approaching the witness area where Danica sat holding Marcus. "Hi, baby," she said softly. I'm Victoria." Marcus peeked at her from the safety of Danica's arms, thumbing his mouth the way he did when he was nervous. Victoria reached out to touch his face, and Marcus pulled back, whimpering. "It's okay," Danica whispered, even though her heart was breaking. "She's not going to hurt you." But Marcus shook his head, clinging tighter. "No, my mama." The courtroom was silent as Victoria's face crumpled. 18 months of bonding couldn't be erased by biology. Attachment didn't follow legal definitions. "I made a mistake," Victoria whispered, and for the first time, she looked at Danica directly. I thought I could come back and pick up where I left off. But he doesn't know me." Judge Martinez leaned forward. "Are you withdrawing your petition, Miss Strathmore?" Victoria looked at her son, happy, healthy, loved, in the arms of the woman who'd raised him. "I'm asking the court to formalize what's already true. Danica Moore is his mother. I gave birth to him, but she made him her son." The gavel came down on a decision that felt like victory and heartbreak all at once. Marcus was theirs legally now, forever. But somewhere in that courtroom, a woman grieved the motherhood she'd lost to mental illness and bad timing. Later, outside the courthouse, Victoria approached them one last time. "Take care of him," she said to Danica. "Love him the way I should have been able to." "I will," Danica promised. "Ido." As they walked away with Marcus between them and their daughter kicking actively in Danica's belly, Owen squeezed her hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Almost Strathmore?" She smiled through her tears. "More than ready." But Owens whispered, "There's something else," suggested their story had one more chapter to write. She married him in a courthouse with a baby on her hip and another in her belly, proving that love doesn't need permission, just commitment. 2 weeks later, they stood in the same courthouse where they'd fought for their family. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. No lawyers, no cameras, no drama. Just Danica in a simple cream dress that flowed over her 8-month belly, Owen in his best suit, and Marcus in tiny dress pants that he kept trying to escape. "Mama pretty," Marcus declared, and Judge Martinez, the same judge who'd awarded them custody, smiled as she prepared to marry them. "Dearly beloved," she began, then paused as Marcus started clapping. "We are gathered here today to witness something beautiful, a family that chose each other." Have you ever attended a wedding where the groom was holding a toddler who kept trying to give the rings to random people in the gallery? Where the bride was so pregnant she had to sit down halfway through the ceremony? It shouldn't have been elegant, but somehow it was perfect, because their love had never been about perfection. It had been about showing up, about choosing each other when it would have been easier to walk away, about building something real from something that started as fake. "The rings," Judge Martinez prompted, and Owen had to chase Marcus around the small ceremony room to retrieve them from where their son was trying to share them with the court reporter. "Sorry." Owen laughed, breathless. "He thinks everyone needs jewelry today." "Maybe everyone does," Danica said, watching their son with eyes full of love and laughter. When Owen finally got the rings back and slipped the band onto Danica's finger, he looked in her eyes and forgot they had an audience. "I promise to love you when you're covered in baby formula and when you're dressed for dinner," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I promise to choose you every day, not just when it's easy. I promise to be worthy of the trust you gave me even when I didn't deserve it." Danica's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. "I promise to let you love me even when I'm scared. I promise to build dreams with you instead of just surviving nightmares. I promise to give our children a love so strong they never question their worth. By the power vested in me by the state of Texas," Judge Martinez said, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Owen, you may kiss your bride." But before Owen could move, Marcus shouted, "Kiss Mama," and the whole room erupted in laughter. The kiss was soft, sweet, and interrupted by a toddler trying to squeeze between them. But Danica had never felt more married in her life. 3 hours later, she was in labor. "This is not how I planned our wedding night," Owen said, holding Marcus while Danica breathed through another contraction. "Nothing about us has gone according to plan," she gasped. "Why start now?" Elena Rose Strathmore entered the world at 11:47 p.m., exactly 2 years to the minute after Danica had answered that first emergency call to care for Owen's son. The timing felt like fate, like completion, like coming full circle. As Danica nursed their daughter, while Marcus slept curled against Owen's chest in the hospital chair, she marveled at how far they'd traveled from that first night in the NICU. "Look at us," she whispered. "Who would have thought?" Owen reached over to stroke Elena's tiny hand, his wedding ring catching the light. "I would have," he said simply. "From the moment I saw you love my son, I knew you were going to change everything." Outside their hospital room, photographers still waited. But this time, Danica didn't hide. "Let them see," she told Owen, lifting her chin as they prepared to leave with both children. "Let them see what love looks like when it refuses to apologize." What she didn't know was that her words would inspire a movement that would change how the world saw families like theirs. 5 years later, she stood in the same hospital where their story began, but this time she wasn't the desperate nurse. She was the woman changing how families are defined. The ribbon stretched across the entrance to the new wing of Dallas Presbyterian Hospital, bright red against the gleaming glass and steel. The plaque beside the doors read, "The Danica Moore Center for Maternal Support," in elegant bronze letters that caught the Texas sun. Marcus, now 7, stood beside her in his best button-down shirt, holding 4-year-old Elena's hand while their youngest, 2-year-old James, balanced on Owen's shoulders. Their family had grown in the most natural way possible, love expanding to make room for each new heartbeat. "Mama, when do we cut the ribbon?" Elena asked, her father's blue eyes bright with excitement. "In just a minute, baby girl," Danica said, smoothing her daughter's curls. Elena had inherited Owen's coloring but Danica's stubborn independence, a combination that already promised interesting teenage years. The crowd gathered for the dedication included faces from every chapter of their story. Dr. Williams from the NICU, now retired but beaming with pride. Keisha and the other nurses who'd stood by Danica during the worst of the scandal. Owen's business partners, the ones who'd stayed when others had walked away over optics. And in the front row, Victoria sat quietly with her new husband and the daughter they'd had together. She and Danica had found an unexpected friendship over the years, bonded by their love for Marcus and their understanding of what mental illness could steal and recovery could restore. "Before we officially open the center," Danica said, stepping up to the microphone, "I want to tell you why this matters." Her voice carried clearly across the crowd, stronger and more confident than it had been 5 years ago when she was just a night shift nurse trying to survive. "This building exists because I once stood in a different part of this hospital, desperate enough to sell my body to save my mother. Because the system failed women like me, women who had to choose between dignity and survival." Marcus squeezed her hand, and she smiled down at him. He knew parts of their story now, age-appropriate versions of how his family had come together through love that refused to accept society's limitations. But mostly, this center exists because one man saw worth in a woman who'd forgotten her own value. Because love can transform desperation into determination. Because the most beautiful families are often the ones that don't fit traditional molds. The ribbon fell away under her scissors, and the crowd erupted in applause as the Danica Moore Center for Maternal Support officially opened its doors. Inside, the facility offered everything she'd wished for during her darkest moments. Lactation support for mothers in crisis, emergency childcare for working parents, mental health services for postpartum depression, and most importantly, alternatives to the impossible choices she'd once faced. That evening, in their home that no longer needed fortress walls because the world had finally accepted their love story, Danica tucked their children in a bed while Owen cleaned up from the day's celebration. "Do you ever regret how we started?" she asked later, curled against him in their king-sized bed. "Never," he said without hesitation, "because it led us here, to this life, these children, this love that's bigger than we ever imagined." Outside their windows, Dallas spread out in all its complicated beauty. Somewhere in that city, other women faced impossible choices. Other families struggled to define themselves against society's expectations. Other love stories waited to be written by people brave enough to choose each other. But inside their home, Marcus dreamed of soccer practice, and Elena planned elaborate tea parties, and baby James slept with the deep contentment of a child who'd never known anything but love. Their story had started with deception and desperation, with a nurse who thought she had nothing left to lose and a billionaire who'd forgotten how to feel. But it had become something else entirely, proof that families are built by choice, not chance. That love doesn't need permission from strangers. That the most powerful force in the world is two broken people deciding to heal together. As Danica drifted off to sleep in Owen's arms, she thought about that scared young woman who'd answered an emergency call 5 years ago. She wanted to tell her that the worst night of her life was actually the beginning of the best life she could imagine. That sometimes the most beautiful love stories start with someone seeing your worth when you've forgotten it yourself. That home isn't a place. It's the people who choose to build something lasting together. So what would you do if love found you in the most unexpected place? Would you fight for it even when the world said it was wrong? Hit that like button if you believe love doesn't need permission, just courage. Subscribe for more stories that prove family is what you make it, not what others expect it to be. And tell me in the comments, what's your definition of a happy ending? Remember, the best love stories don't start with perfection. They start with two broken people choosing to heal together. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that refuse to apologize for existing.